Less than 3 weeks until Tennessee takes the field on Saturday of Labor Day weekend here in Nashville, Nissan Stadium, against the Virginia Cavaliers. Knoxville Sports Talk Show host Tony Basilio joins us for his weekly visit. Tony, I have got a Tennessee football story that you may know, but then again, you may not.
All right, hit it.
Okay. So last night, David Cutcliffe, who now lives in Birmingham, met up with me, and we went to Truist Park to see the Braves and the Yankees. He had not been to the new stadium, loved it. In the course of the evening, I asked him, I said, how did you end up at Tennessee? Here's what he told me. He was a 23-year-old high school head football coach down in Alabama. And Johnny Majors made what I guess was a recruiting trip down to see one of Cutcliffe's players and came away really impressed with how organized Cutcliffe was. And at some point, Majors said to Cutcliffe, I need to meet you in your office when this practice session is over. Well, Cutcliffe's initial thought is, oh, man, I have done something seriously wrong. When, in fact, Majors went in and said, how in the world did you learn to run a practice this good at this age? And Cutcliffe told him, said, I've been around a lot of people at the University of Alabama. I've tried to learn a little bit from everybody. Majors ends up telling him that day, get ready for a phone call. I am going to hire you at the end of the year. And you know what? Johnny Majors did.
Wow.
How about that?
Changed his life.
Yeah.
That's amazing, man. That's a great story.
I had never heard
about the thing about Cutcliffe, thinking about that, was Fulmer with Cutcliffe was Fulmer, and without him, it wasn't the same thing. And it was, people said that when Cutcliffe came back after Tennessee's losing season and they won those games before he got hired at Duke, and then inevitably Fulmer got terminated after Cutcliffe left because it went back to being sort of as it was. But they said the tempo in practice, the organization in practice was a lot better when Cutcliffe was there. So that makes sense, George.
So the funniest line, we'll get to Tennessee football here in a second. Last night, Mark DeRosa was doing the game on MLB Network, and he's a former University of Penn, if you will, quarterback. And so he gets Cutcliffe going on, how quick does a quarterback need to release the football? And Cutcliffe tells him, it absolutely got to be out in 2.5. And DeRosa says to him, not in the Ivy League. He said, they're not as good an athletes. He said, give us an extra second, 3.5.
That's awesome, man.
It was
really
really
a thing
fun.
With somebody from the Ivies the other day, George. They said, we're the one league. It's staying together. Nobody from the Ivies jumping anywhere. But, I hear that you and Frank Core are big buddies. I'll tell you this. Frank Core kind of finished his career in Philly. And the way he carried himself up there, my buddies in the media say that he remains one of the more popular guys that have worn that uniform in recent years. Class act.
Yeah, Jeff knew his P's and Q's. He had two parents who were educators. His mom taught Matt Olson, who all of a sudden is challenging to be the National League MVP.
Yeah.
Taught him at Parkview High School. So I'll pass on the compliment. I know he would appreciate that.
I love that guy.
Tell me what's going on with Tennessee football so far. Who's looking good?
Yeah.
Who are you worried about?
So far, George, the best thing about camp is only one injury of note, and that's to Cooper Mays, who's Tennessee's center. And that sort of destabilized their offensive line. I wrote about this in my blog today over at tclub.team. The real concern for them internally, and they're putting their best foot forward publicly, because there's two things that go on in football. There's what goes on behind the scenes, and there's what you tell the press. And they're telling the media, hey, you know, kind of nothing to see here. They're really concerned about their offensive line, and we're a couple and a half weeks out. And the issue is that some of their depth guys that they were counting on just haven't joined the party as of yet. On the other side of the football, they have a collection of youngsters that they've brought in, guys that they've signed, who are, I was told, not a whiff in the bunch, which if you can say that right now, that's a great sign. Now, they don't know how many of those guys are going to contribute early on. They do think they've got some guys, and they get towards the back part of the schedule, they can introduce some of the freshmen, but none of them have really jumped off the page, with the exception of Arion Carter from down in Smyrna, who has just been a revelation and has been one of the better players in camp. In fact, a couple of the veterans on the offensive line have pointed out, just unprompted to the press here, hey, this guy's it. I mean, this guy's got a motor, and he hits hard, and so they're going to have an impact from a freshman linebacker. In a perfect world, they would have had a couple of young guys in their secondary come in here and really push and challenge some of the slower veteran players that are back. Tennessee's secondary at times last year, George, looked like that old game of electric football that we used to play where you turn the board on and, you know, you got the safety over there grabbing. Yeah. And you have to be of a certain age to get that, but it's not good, you know, when your safety's in the middle of the field turning around because the board's vibrating and somebody's gone by him. But the thing I heard, and I heard from a couple different people, so I wrote it today, is they don't think there's a whiff on the defensive side of their signees, which is a great sign. What's it mean right away? Who knows? But, you know, what it's going to come down to is, can Mays be back by the Florida game? Can Tennessee's offensive line be good enough to win at Florida with Joe Milton? And right now, Tennessee's offensive line, I'll be honest with you, has me extremely concerned.
Let me go back to the defensive side of it, where you've painted a really pretty picture. Is the day and time of being able to get away with redshirting a kid over because the kid can look at the coach and say, screw you, I'm in the portal the first minute that baby's open?
Well, I mean, yes, but I think, and Kelly can kind of speak to this, I think what it comes down to is, I think you've got to be honest with kids and manage expectations. And one thing I'll say about Josh Heupel, you know, people say, well, how's this guy done this? His predecessors were not good. Well, you know, not so much Pruitt, but the guys before Pruitt were really good at talking down the kids. And if you want to turn a kid off in today's day and age, don't be successful and talk down to them. This guy is really good at treating people professionally. And by that, what I mean is they're pretty good about managing expectations. This is what you can expect on the front end. Hopefully, you know, if you do these things and meet this threshold, you'll get a shot on the field. I think some of those young guys, probably when they get into camp, outside of Carter, and there might be a few more, but probably it's a little bit overwhelming at this point in time. Even the guys that go through winter practice, because you're just not developed yet. But they do think they've got a bunch of guys that can develop. But you bring up a great question and a great point, which is you don't want to develop people for other teams down the line. You don't want to develop players for other programs.
Oh, yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah.
Kelly, jump in here, and if you've got an opinion on the whole red shirt thing, fire it out there before we start with Tony.
I don't know about that. I just like what Tony said, because I can remember being around some coaches that you could just tell up front they're phony. I mean,
Yeah.
they would always use coach speak. And the guys that I enjoyed being around, the guys that I like, the coaches, and I think everybody's like this. We're like this, are the guys that tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard that about Josh Heupel. I've heard you have to. It's a different age now. That's just the way it is with the transfer portal, and we have to come to the realization that you may have to recruit your own kids, but you have to be honest with those guys. And I think it doesn't matter where they come from; they just want you to be honest with them.
Yeah.
And I think that I've heard that from so many people up there that it's just changed the culture at UT. And obviously, they had the year that they had last year, and they're looking for another year. But people just want you to be truthful with them, whether you like. That's what I always tell people a lot, because they say, "Well, you're a negative guy." Well, don't say I'm negative because I tell you the truth. Now, it's your job if you can't handle the truth. Just like the old Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men. I mean, you
Right.
can't handle the truth. So
Right.
I'm going to tell people the truth, and I think that's huge for today's sports.
Well, the
Greatest
other
movie
thing
scene
too,
in history, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
no doubt. The other thing though about football that's always gotten me down through the years, and Kelly, you'll appreciate this, is generally when I visit with, because we're not allowed to see the stuff anymore. Like it's, media people go in there and watch them stretch. I have no interest in going and watch somebody stretch. I mean, I'm sure that's exciting. I'm sure that's exciting to somebody. That does not speak to me. So therefore, you have to call folks, and you've got to rely on your sources, and that's fine. Because I talk to a couple people that are there all the time, whose opinions I respect. Well, generally, when they tell me on the front end, this person can play, this person can't, I don't know what it is about that sport. Now, guys do develop. We'll agree on that, all these positions. But sometimes you look at an offensive lineman and you go, that guy has zero chance. And I've talked to players down through the years, and they say you walk out on a field and you go, oh, that's the guy that was highly recruited. He can't play. Like it takes you 2 practices or that guy over there, if he works hard, has a bright future. That is the strangest thing about the game of football to me. Kelly, I know people are listening to us and they don't believe me. And I'm going to ask you, have you found that to be true too? Where you can look at guys and go, that guy can play or that guy can't. And generally it's right.
Players always know, Tony. It's really funny because my agent used to tell me that. He's like, no matter what's going on in the building, players always know. Players always pick up the vibe of a coach. If a coach is phony, players know. If a guy can't play, players know. I can remember me, and this is a long time ago, and I got to play in the Tennessee-Kentucky All-Star game, and there was a guy on the defensive line, and he was a third-team All-South guy. He's from Memphis, and we went up there to UT in practice for the whole week and went to Lexington and played Kentucky when they had Damon Hood, and that's when Bill Curry took over there. But this defensive lineman, he was third-team All-South. He looked the part. I mean, he was gigantic. He didn't even know how to line down in a stance. And he was, I think Tennessee signed him. He never made it because he couldn't play. You can just tell by looking and watching the guy, like the dude looks like Tarzan, but he plays like Jane. I mean, it's unbelievable. And players always know. You're absolutely right, Tony. They always know.
So when I heard yesterday, one of my sources say to me, there's not a whiff in this deal, I think that's pretty significant because generally in one of these classes, you're going to have on that side of the ball, probably 8 to 10 to 12 different guys. Maybe they went pretty defense heavy this time around. It might be a little more than that. When they say no whiff in the deck, that means that they feel like everybody's going to be able to contribute, which is pretty significant, Kelly. That's a pretty good hit rate if that turns out to be true. Now, the reality is, some guys will be better than others, but it's going to be real interesting to see how this staff is able to develop these guys, because I think that's a good sign, what I heard yesterday on the defensive side of things anyway.
It seemed like they're really good at developing talent, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But as you know this, and as I know this, being a high school coach and at any level, you always hear guys say, well, he's a can't-miss guy. Well, when you say that's like the kiss of death to somebody.
Right.
Because if you say he's a can't-miss guy, then I'm going to show you flaws in there. And some guys make it, some guys don't. You know that. I mean, they might be all world where they're coming from, but they just don't fit the system. I use Jim Plunkett. I mean, Jim Plunkett with the New England Patriots, and he was terrible. And then he goes to Al Davis, and hey, honor and everything out there, honor and respect for the Oakland Raiders, and then he
Right.
goes and he wins a Super Bowl. I mean, it's timing, and some guys can, some guys can't, and it's funny to see. It's interesting to see how all that plays out.
Well, I'll know this staff has really got it. If they really unlock Joe Milton and they really get him playing ball,
correct.
That will be, I mean, that will really prove it to me. And look, I'm not down on Joe Milton, but people say, well, I'm negative. I'm just a reality person when it comes to this stuff. And I believe in your track record. And until you show me a different track record, I mean, it's what we have. But
it's a little like Jonathan Crompton.
That's exact. Well, George, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, I was sitting there, and I'm like you though. The Joe, he played really good in the Orange Bowl. He played lights out. He threw the ball well, but I just can't get that first game out of the back of my mind when he played against, I think it was Pittsburgh. Was it Pittsburgh? University of Pittsburgh?
Oh yeah.
And he was over like Josh Heupel could not draw plays up any better to get guys open, and he was throwing scud missiles, and that's in there. Now, obviously coaching has a lot to do with it. But a kid has to handle his emotions. There's a lot that goes into it. He's playing at a big-time program. He's got a lot of expectations on him. And, I've talked with Danny Evans, the guy that comes on here talking about baseball, about expectations. When you get paid a lot of money and those expectations get bolstered up, man, there's a lot of pressure on you. And if you fold to that pressure, it's not very hard to do that.
Well, I was at the Trey Turner standing ovation game a couple weeks ago in Philly.
Oh, wow. I saw
when they
it.
stood up and cheered.
Awesome.
I was one of the people that stood up and cheered. People around us like, what are you doing? But look, I mean, for one thing, I know how mental the whole deal is. And for another thing, that's a guy that doesn't want to dog it. He's not one of these guys that, lollygags around and disrespects the game. And, he plays hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so and we were sitting in the player section because a player got us some tickets. And, those folks were really touched to see that entire fan base stand up and cheer for a guy who, to that point, was way in the tank on the season, like 100 points below where they thought he was going to hit. Hadn't hit the ball out of the park, wasn't fielding very well, just wasn't doing a whole lot well on the season. And I don't think people appreciate how mental these things become. And major college football, there's no question that if you go out there and you're Joe Milton and you lose your gig at Michigan and you come to Tennessee, you lose your gig at Tennessee, that's got to be tough to get up from. So he's got to play this year. If he has a big season, I'll know Josh Heupel is unbelievable. I already know Josh Heupel's great at what he does, but if they can unlock Joe Milton for a full year, come on now, that'll prove it to me.
I agree.
Okay. Nothing more out of you, Kelly?
No, I'm good. I got some questions. Are we going to a break or what?
No. If you've got more, go. You look like
Well, I was
Kelly's
just going to ask.
Kelly's saying to himself right now, when does Watson Brown, can we reintroduce him? Tony's boring me. When can we make that happen? But go ahead, Cal.
No, I was gonna ask. I didn't. I'm just kind of stepping in for Watson. I know you and him are boys. I mean, good gracious, I'm trying to fill his shoes. I don't know if I can.
You're my love now.
Oh Lord, here we go. Are you going to offer me a job too? I mean, you're offering Billy a job. Can you offer me a job as well? I'll come.
I didn't offer Billy a job. I just simply said that I admire Billy's talent. I would hate to drag Billy into the poorhouse.
Billy, I think, is desperate for you to do that because Kelly has accused him of turning it into a gym shoe operation.
George, I've got a question for Tony later.
Do you really?
Yeah. After
go right ahead. Butt in on Kelly.
Butt in?
Yeah. What the hell?
Okay. Here we go. Tony, I got a chance to listen today, and I heard you guys talking about the expectations, right? And I think somebody mentioned 2016 was a big year with a lot of expectations for Tennessee. This season, how do you gauge the excitement level after a season like last year where that just sort of blew the top off, not just Knoxville, but the country? So How do you gauge the excitement level right now with Tennessee's fan base?
For one thing, Billy, it's higher than I can remember. You know, a caller asked me that today, and I had to stop and think. First of all, and George will attest to this, the older you get, the more these years run together. That's one.
Tell me about it.
The second thing is, though, it's been so long since Tennessee's had any kind of expectation that I wouldn't have had to answer that. So one of my cohorts said 2016, and I kind of nodded, and I guess that made sense. To me, it would have to be early 2000s. Look, people want to really, a lot of people around here want to really believe that the program is back. And I think this program's semi-back, and I think it's heading in the right direction. The problem is in the Southeastern Conference is you're not dealing with people that are going to wait on you to get your deal up to speed. Like last year, they lost a guy that won the Blitnikoff Award, a guy that would have won the Blitnikoff Award if he didn't get hurt in Tillman. They lost a guy that would have won the Heisman Trophy, the first ever in school history. And by the way, they won the first Blitnikoff Award, and a guy off their offense who's going to start for the Chicago Bears day one. Mm-hmm. And they're replacing them with some pretty able and capable players on offense, but this team's got to outscore people. And, the offensive line remains an issue, but hey, people are rightfully excited because Billy, they got their program back, man. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. They've got their program back, and you know what? Good for them, because this is a great fan base that deserves that. It really is. It's a great fan base.
1,000 season tickets sold.
Yeah.
Whew. Kelly, give him one more.
Well, this is my last
you've ever asked.
Well, I don't know about that, but this is my last one. I know the weakness. You thinking the weakness is offensive line, maybe? I mean,
yes.
That's where it starts up front. What do you think is the strength of this team?
You know, as crazy as it sounds, I think there are a couple of them. I think the wide receivers are excellent.
Okay.
And I think the linebacking core is going to be very good. So
Sweet.
If they could figure out a way to generate a pass rush, or they might just turn some people loose, but they've got a really decent, actually a really deep linebacking core with some capable bodies there and some guys that can make some plays for the first time in a long time. Jeremy Banks going off, and the Mitchell kid who transferred in from Texas, who left here in the portal, really did some favors for the program because they're good at that position. And then the wide receivers, Kelly, when you see a couple of these guys, you're going to be like, what? Did they put these guys together in factories? When you see a couple of these dudes, you're going to be like, wow. So if the offensive line can get time and Milton can make the right decisions at the line of scrimmage, this team's going to score a lot of points.
Okay, let's see the shirt in its entirety.
All right.
Okay.
It's the vet, right?
I know exactly what it is.
Pride, pretzels, prison.
They would send people
71 to 2003. And George, there was a prison. A buddy of mine ran onto the field.
Right.
And there was a judge under the stadium.
Yes.
And you would go before the judge. And a buddy of mine did that. He had a little too much to drink.
700 section, I'm told, could get a little fierce.
700 section. When I was a kid, the Phillies and Pirates would play every year because they were in the same division. And the people would come over from Pittsburgh. And I have literally, I close my eyes and see this, the fights in the stands of people rolling down the stairs, fighting each other, the Pittsburgh fans and the Phillies fans up there in the cheap seats. You could sit up there for 99 cents a game in the late 70s, early 80s. $1 a game.
Tony, that was the worst. That was the worst field ever. I played there a couple of times, and it was terrible.
They
Sorry. I mean, I know
Uganda.
No, but it was bad.
Horrendous, right? Like,
absolutely.
I think Wendell Tyler from LSU blew out both knees on the same play on that field, which doesn't surprise me. But I remember Reggie White telling me one time when he came back here, he was like, man, I had no idea how bad that field was till I went to Green Bay and played on grass.
And George,
what do you know?
Look out for the Fighting Phils right now.
Oh, look.
They're hanging around,
Hey.
creeping in there, staying alive.
They've got my attention, believe me.
The Phillies and the Dodgers are the only two teams in the National League that could take the Braves in a series. Otherwise, you guys are home free.
I think you're right.
You don't want to see the Phils, though, George.
Don't want to see the Phils, and sure as hell don't want to see the Dodgers.
Mm-mm.
Tell them how they can hear your show.
tclub.team. Tell Frenchie Francoeur I love him. I'm a fan, man.
Are you hiring Billy?
Billy, you got my digits, brother. Reach out.
I got him. Phone call away.
See you guys.
Be real
Thank y'all.
careful with that. See you, Tony.
Thank you, guys.